So, what will you be today? A crowd-following victim? A self-centered victor? Or a leader guiding others well? You get to choose. What will I decide? To be a victim, a victor, or a vector? A victim's life is defined by his suffering. His defining emotion is self-pity, poor me. A victor's life is defined by his success. His defining emotion is pride. A vector's life is defined by his relationship to God. A vector is an arrow showing others the way. The defining emotions of a vector are humility and thankfulness. Joseph in the Old Testament was all three. When he was thrown into the pit by his brothers, he was a victim, whining and crying. As a victim, his life was defined by his suffering, poor me. As a victim, his focus was on himself and the circumstances that surrounded him. He was not thinking about God at all. Then, when he was a slave in Egypt in Potiphar's house, he was vastly successful and became a victor. With me in charge, he told Potiphar's wife, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. As a victor, his life was defined by success. No success, no life. But being a victor is not a secure situation. Even though Joseph did what was right, he ended up in prison. And there in prison, he began his transition from a self-centered victor to a God-centered vector. And it began with his caring for others in prison, worse off than himself. A vector points people to God, not to himself, and that's what Joseph did in the end. When Pharaoh said, I hear you can interpret dreams, Joseph replied, no, but God can. Joseph thus pointed away from himself to God as the one who can do all things. As a vector's life is defined by his relationship to God, he is not dependent on people's affirmation. So his situation is very secure, as stable as the mountains. Each of these people has a different orientation. A victim constantly looks down and sees only suffering, ignoring all the good around them. A victor looks at himself and sees how successful he is. His trust is in himself, not knowing how easily a fall could await him. In contrast, a vector looks up, realizing how small and weak he is and how strong God is. And he knows he's safe in God's hands. To summarize, a victim is in a pit trapped in the dark, while a victor is on a mountaintop all alone, setting himself up for a fall. But a vector is on level ground, safe and sure in his relationship with God, knowing that God is leading him in paths of righteousness. So, the choice is ours. We can be a victim, a victor, or a vector. But now the question is, how can you become a vector? You must first point yourself to God by making him the center of your life, not just an add-on. And you do that by involving him in all you do and doing what you know is right. Probably the most important discipline to keep Christ in the center is learning to offer the sacrifice of thanksgiving, a very unnatural practice. To learn more about this, watch this video on this site. Here are some other disciplines which will help you keep Jesus in the center of your life. Loving his word by reading, memorizing, and meditating on it, and meeting with him every day. Loving him by doing what his word says, undergirding all with prayer. Being consistent in attending church, looking for opportunities to share your faith. For a more in-depth and practical explanation, watch the 2 videos on leading yourself well, found on this same site. Also, you can learn more about keeping Jesus at the center of your life from reading this book, found on edifyingservicespublishing.com, and you can use this QR code to find it.